Hello, this is Curt Pringle. Thank you for tuning in to Talking Issues. This series, we talk about public policy issues in California, and today might be a little divergence from that, but we'll make sure we touch that. I have a guest, a longtime friend, but to be honest, not always has he been a friend. I was first elected to the Assembly in 1988, and in 1990, the Democrats wanted to find the very best person they could find to run against me, and they probably did, in Tom Umberg. So when we have political battles in life, we have to understand that they are transitory, and my relationship with my former adversary is today a relationship with a friend. So today we're able to talk with State Senator Tom Umberg. Glad you're here.
Well, thank you, Curt. You're right. We did start off a little rocky back in 1990.
Yes.
Was a hell of a campaign. I mean, Ronald Reagan came down and campaigned for you. My grandmother came from Cincinnati, campaigned for me. It was a rock'em sock'em campaign. But after that campaign, by the way, you're welcome. I'm going to tell you why you're welcome.
Yes.
You know why you're welcome, because but for that campaign, you wouldn't have been speaker.
That's right. But a lot of people like to take credit for that. Mm-hmm. So on your side of the aisle, some people will give you the blame for that. So you get the blame from the Democrats, and I'll take the appreciation. And I thank you for that.
But it was January 1996 you became speaker, is that right?
Yes,
right.
And that story goes that Prop 140, term limits, passed in 1990. So anyone who was elected in 1990, and that was the year you beat me, that started the clock on term limits. And since I wasn't there for that time, I had a few more years, one more term, than anybody else who had been elected in 1990. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. And then we had an opportunity to. You were mayor of Anaheim, and then I came back to the assembly.
Yes.
In the mid 2000s, and we had several projects we were able to work on together, which was quite fun for me.
So what are you doing? Trying to cram everything, all of our engagement into the opening paragraph?
I'm trying to preempt you.
Yeah, you are.
Right.
That's okay. Right. But one is my podcast. You can preempt me on the floor of the Senate. So how's that?
Right,
so
right.
It really is a very long and accomplished career, not just your military service and serving in the Army Reserves. And you retired from that as a colonel. Is that how that works? I don't know all that military stuff, right. So that is certainly an accomplishment. And your service in the private sector as a lawyer, you have served 3 terms, the maximum allowed in the Constitution at the time, in the state assembly. And now you're in the middle of your 2nd term as a state senator. And after this, you are prohibited by the state constitution from ever serving the California legislature again. Is that right?
That's absolutely
so correct. Anybody, my dear friend Janet Wynn or Rhonda Shader, who you beat in your last 2 senatorial elections, they don't have to fear that you're going to run again for state senate, so they can be happy about that.
People of the state of California have said that all of us
yes,
are
exactly.
limited in terms in the legislature.
Yes. No. It's interesting to me. A lot of people, most people in the legislature would say term limits are bad. Would you say that?
I would. That's a broad question.
Yeah.
But I can tell the difference, and maybe you can tell the difference between the legislature in the early 1990s, before term limits really had their impact,
right,
and today. Yeah. The level of experience in 1990, early 1990s, among legislators was much deeper. And as a consequence, legislators developed their own areas of expertise. And now, cut to 30 years later, God, I almost hate to say that, is that a lot of that expertise either resides in the staff or in the 3rd House. And the 3rd House, for those who don't know, that's basically the lobbying community. That's where that expertise lies versus the sort of expertise that was developed, if you pick, some of the former speakers who had been there 15, 16 years before they became speaker, very different.
Yeah, no, see, I totally understand that perspective, but I was the first legislator, and I think the only legislator in California that endorsed Prop 140. Many of which was the initial term limit law that went into effect in 1990. I know some of my friends who were in leadership of the Republican Party at that time were very upset that I would do that. But In hindsight, I do like term limits, and I, the definition of expertise though is where I would love to have debates, and we don't need to have it today. But the expertise that I see is a different perspective of life, and how communities operate, how cities run, how local businesses run, and people who are not in the legislature for 20, 30 years, I think, do have that realistic sense of how life is in California. And that, even though since term limits, Democrats have marched on to come to a supermajority in the state legislature, which is certainly a drawback. I won't blame that on term limits, but I will blame the fact that I think legislators may not necessarily see, if they've been in office too long, what really is happening in the world.
So I think your point concerning life experience is really important. There has been a transformation, though, for a variety of reasons. It's actually younger and a lot of staffers who are now legislators, as opposed to back when you and I were young pups in the state assembly.
Right.
The term limits are different today than they were when you and I were first serving, and they're better in the sense that you can serve, when we were first elected, you could serve 3 terms in the assembly and 2 in the Senate for a total of 14 years. Now it's a combined total of only 12 years, but you can serve all 12 years in one house. Yeah. And so I do think that's better. I think that people who've served 12 years, for example, in the assembly, or 12 years in the Senate, they do develop, their own expertise.
Right. No, I totally agree. Right. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly, but the author or the funder of term limits in 1990 was a contractor out of the state of New York, and I went to see him on this exact point and to see if he would be supportive of modifying term limits from 3 terms in the assembly at the time and 2 terms in the Senate, so a maximum time of service of 14 years, if he would be open to a 12-year global term limit like we have today. And he said, absolutely not. And I said, your challenge is there's so much turmoil when people leave in 6 years. And he said, that's what I want. So, I mean, there are different people from different points of view who wanted term limits for the churning of the operation, as opposed to how do you keep things running smoothly. And but it's a good debate. I'm glad there are term limits, both as mayor and as an assembly member.
So when I was first running for office, I talked about fresh ideas and new blood and so forth, and now I talk about experience
and wisdom.
And wisdom. That's so much more important.
Yeah. The challenge, and what really is more important.
Yeah. Well, of course, experience. Now, because I'm experienced.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to be, truthful and.
Oh, no. Actually, I mean, of course, a sign of old age is you're sort of bemoaning the current generation.
Right.
But I think running state government is a very complicated. It's a very complicated process. I mean, you know that from your time as speaker and the time you served. I think one of the challenges is that it's very difficult for folks sort of in midlife to serve, people with families. You and I had families when we first started, but very hard. One of the things that was eliminated also is pension. Right. So, if you're going to serve, I'm older. I've had, as you mentioned, different careers. But if you're 40 years old and you want to serve in the legislature, those are your prime earning years, and you're going to be serving without a pension, away from home, makes it difficult. And I really believe that we do need a broader cross section of individuals with life experience.
Actually, that's a really good perspective, and I think it kind of points to who does run for office, right? Either you are young, ambitious, wanting to get there, you haven't established a career necessarily, or people who are at the end of their chosen career and now are looking for some other excitement or different opportunity. When I first got elected in 1988, to put it in perspective, the year before, I was selling draperies at Pringle's Draperies, and I made a certain amount of money. Then when I went to the legislature, I made about $30,000 less. I think my salary was $36,000 in 1988 in the state legislature. So my wife asked me very clearly, why is this such a good idea? I think a lot of people had that challenge, because back then the legislature didn't pay, and because of the system, I think the legislature now pays commensurate salary with judges or something. Is that how that?
No. Judges, Superior Court judges make $239,000 a year,
okay.
and we make, I think, $114,000 a year.
Oh, okay. So you had to think about that, though.
Yes, it's your point is exactly correct. I mean, I've had a career, different careers. In fact, I even still practice law, and so I don't have kids at home like I did. I went from having 3 little ones to now having 7 grandchildren, and I can serve, and it's not a financial burden to my family.
Yes.
But it is to some.
Yeah. So last year or so, you sent me this email with this picture, and I think it'll pop up on the screen in a minute so that people won't see it. But this is the picture of Umberg and Pringle at a debate, and you look friendly. I look very serious.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but yes. But one of my kids said, "Dad, I didn't know you wore glasses." That's a picture of Curt, by the way, with the glasses. Yeah,
exactly. Right. I got rid of my glasses when I became speaker because I didn't need them. But before, I wore glasses in that election because people thought I needed to look older. So keep your glasses on and keep the big old glasses on, and I did do that. So since you have really served since first being elected to the Assembly in 1990 to today is 2023, and you're going to be there till 2026. What has changed most in the legislature? What do you see as the big changes?
There are 2 huge changes. One is we've already talked about term limits. The folks, when you and I were first elected, I mean, there were people who had been there, 15, 20 years. The speaker had been there probably 20 years when we were elected.
Right.
And so I suppose for good or for ill, folks had more experience. But the other thing that changed from when I was first elected is the mix. When you and I served, I think it was 40 in the Assembly. Assembly has 80 members. I think it was 42 Democrats, 38 Republicans, or something very close. It was very, very close. And to pass a budget, you needed 2/3 votes. So you needed 54 votes in the Assembly and 27 votes in the Senate, which meant that there had to be compromise, which meant that the Democrats certainly had to talk to Republicans. And I recall one of the first caucuses we ever had, the speaker at the time was Willie Brown, said basically, hey, Republican bills are going to pass, get over it. We're working with the Republicans, get over it. We've got to pass a budget. So we need to, from this day forward, we need to start thinking about how we're going to keep the state operational, how we're going to have a state budget. So now, with the Democrats in supermajority in both houses, that conversation...
Leaning over the 2/3.
Well over the 2/3.
Right.
In the Senate, we're 32 Democrats to 8 Republicans. And the budget requires only a majority vote. So in the Senate, that's only 21. In the Assembly, it's only 41. And so as a consequence, that conversation, that compromise, even that debate doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And, don't tell this to anybody. I thought the process then was it was more reflective of, I think, the sort of the consensus values of California.
Yeah. I think sometimes people lose the fact that, this is a representative democracy. And, one of my, some of my good friends in the legislature happen to be really liberal people from the Bay Area. And, I think during that time of my service, I could see that person could never get elected here in Orange County, nor I get elected there. Mm-hmm. But the opportunity for people to have their point of view reflected in the legislative body was important. So it's okay that a liberal gets elected there and a conservative Republican gets elected here, because you really do have that balance. And today, I think, be it redistricting, be it the power of the Democrat Party in the legislature, whatever it may be, that you're missing a lot of that balanced voice. And does that add to this public anxiety, this public questioning of institutions, the public's loss of, who does the public trust anymore? You know what I mean? And I see it kind of in this broader context of public anxiety. I see people, regardless of their political background or where they come from, but they're anxious about so much in their life, and that swirls around school or finances or government or the future. I mean, are you seeing that?
I do see it. I think that the public, the most sort of prominent governmental institution, at least legislative institution, is the House of Representatives in Washington. And they are extremely polarized, and the debate is a bit acrimonious and even personal. And folks think that somehow that's true here in California. And I can only speak for the state senate. We're only 40 members. And we see one another literally on a daily basis. And we interact with one another. We know each other's families. We don't have that same sort of acrimony at all.
Right.
Even though we're divided, as I mentioned, 32 to 8, it is a institution where it's more informal than formal when we have to take others' points of view into account. But the public views us, I think, like they view the House of Representatives, and because of that, the contentiousness and the polarization of the House of Representatives, I think it seeps down into the body politic and their view of all legislative institutions, which is a shame.
Yeah. But I think people, maybe not based on the House, but they have this assumption that if you have a different political point of view than somebody else, then you're an enemy. I mean, hey, you and I don't agree on most of the major political issues. We can find a whole bunch of stuff we agree on. But the point is, I want to make sure I give you cover with any Democrat activist who may look at this podcast and think, oh, geez, is Umberg selling out? You are not, nor am I. But we can have a relationship and a friendship and understanding that we have different points of view on things. And I don't know if the general public is encouraged to see that as much. And that isn't it better that you do find those points of agreement or those points of contentment with working with somebody else, because there may be a compromise, there may be a solution that you can come to.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that every day when I'm in the Senate, and I hear my colleagues, as you mentioned, from the left and from the right, something new, so a new concept or a new way of looking at things sort of comes to mind. And I think that at least it helps me personally, but I think it helps the process as well.
Right.
Yet to your earlier point, I don't think that the general public knows that or understands that. And I think that you're right. Some activists think that you're doing your job when you are, you're casting flaming arrows, shooting flaming arrows at the other side, and you're getting really personal. And that's not my style, number one. And number two, that's not the way to govern.
Yeah, right. Well, there's one point in time where you and I did agree on something, and that was when the governor, Schwarzenegger, appointed me to the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Yes, that's the high-speed train, high-speed rail. The register forever condemning the high-speed rail, and then the Speaker of the Assembly appointed you to the California High-Speed Rail Authority. So after this history that we both had to be able to serve together on the same board, where probably constituents, be they meaning Republicans or Democrats, all may have had the same angst about the high-speed rail in that system. Why did you agree to serve on that?
Oh, I believe, I'm one of the sort of dwindling numbers, sadly, that believe in high-speed rail, believe that we should have a system in California for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them is because it absolutely will invigorate the Central Valley. I mean, the system, folks look at it as just a route from San Francisco, Los Angeles. It's not that. It's a system, and I think that's
correct. What you just said. We were able to amend it so the terminus is
Right.
Anaheim. So it's San Francisco to Anaheim, just quickly bypassing Los Angeles.
Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. It is the terminus is and at least the initial terminus is in Anaheim.
Right.
You're absolutely correct. But I wanted to serve because that's an area I've been interested in, and I was pleased to serve with you. You were chair,
Right.
And I'd like to think I had some role in making that happen.
You did. I mean, the true story is the governor of the state had somebody else in mind to be chair, even though he appointed me, and he was very gracious to me, but he wanted certain people to vote for another person for chair, but all the legislative appointees were kind enough to vote for me. And then at the same time, you were appointed as vice chair. So here these two people who fought against each other in one political campaign served as chair and vice chair of the High-Speed Rail Authority. And at that time, much of that time, you were in Afghanistan.
That's right. And in fact, as reflective of our relationship, we would communicate usually via email.
Yes.
And
No, but make sure people see this, that we would have meetings and you would call in from
Wazir Akbar Khan,
wherever that was, and
Right.
you had to have a public notice on the door to say a government meeting in the state of California was going to commence, and what were you, 11 and a half hours difference or
right,
something?
that's exactly right. And I would have to announce to no one that if anyone wishes to make public comment here in the Wazir Akbar Khan, please step forward, because you're right, we had to publicly notice it, we had to post it on the outside of this sort of tent-like facility. Not surprisingly, we didn't have many folks publicly commenting. But I would just, when we were there and we would communicate largely by email, I would communicate with my wife by email, and whenever I was near a computer so I could send her a message, I would send a message, and she would always respond almost immediately. And so once I sent her a message, said, "Good night, I love you," and a couple days later I called and said, "You didn't respond to my message." And she said, "You didn't send me a message." Well, I checked, and guess who got that message?
Yes, exactly. So for all of this battle here, he's the vice chair of the High Speed Rail Authority, and he sends me an email, "Good night, I love you." And I knew our relationship was growing. I didn't know it was growing so fast.
So then I sent it to my wife, and she said, "I know you guys have patched things up, but this is out of hand now."
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
That's right. So you have moved through this legislative session. Was this a good or bad legislative session?
Well, I don't know. That's whether it's good or bad. We did a number of things. We still have, in my view, we still have a number of things left to do. I mean, we keep the first criteria of a legislative session is whether you kept the state operational.
Right.
Whether you
That's a somewhat low bar, but okay.
well, it is a low bar, but sometimes we haven't met that bar.
That's
Sometimes we haven't met the bar of having a budget, not keeping the state running, and
Right.
we met that, as you said, that low bar. We still have work to do. We have work to do, in my mind, on issues like fentanyl. We have work to do on homelessness. We have work to do on building infrastructure, work to do on California's economy, work to do on public safety. But we made progress in certain areas, and I have some of my own frustrations. But that's
Can I just, I don't want to get too deep in too many of these, even though this is called Talking Issues, so we should talk issues, but maybe I could hit a few topics. And the public right now feels, I almost feel the same sense of 1994 in terms of crime, and that what has the legislature done to ease that concern the public has, be it from, robberies at retail stores to, just personal safety?
So I do think that there's public angst over crime and public safety. I do feel like this is not quite like 1993, but you remember in 1993, sadly, there was a horrific episode with a young 12-year-old named Polly Klaas who was kidnapped and ultimately murdered. And from that sprang the Three Strikes Initiative, and which passed overwhelmingly in California. People were very, very concerned. And I think that there's some concern right now. Fentanyl is a big issue. Other issues concerning retail crime, big issues. And this is just me personally. We need to do more. We need to do much better in those areas to people of California. We owe it to the people of California to do better. I've done some of my own legislation. Some has not been successful, but
Yeah. I mean, there's a bill I think a lot of folks are looking at. I mean, there has been a continuing skepticism about some of the initiatives that were on the ballot that let people out of jail early. A bill passed the legislature. I think its final fate is uncertain at this point in time, but SB 94, which basically says someone who's convicted to a crime of life imprisonment without possibility of parole, now, if this bill is signed into law, can petition to be released from jail, even though after 25 years of service, but a service in prison, they could petition. I know you didn't vote for that bill, but is there an argument to be made that makes California safer?
well, you're right. I didn't support it, and I didn't support it for a number of reasons. One is because the promise that we make to victims when someone, for example, accepts a plea of life without the possibility of parole, as opposed to, and we still have capital punishment on the books, as opposed to death penalty,
Right.
is that from the victim's point of view, that's the expectation. The expectation is that you're going to serve until the time you die in prison as a consequence of whatever the crime was. And you have to commit a pretty horrific crime to get life without the possibility of parole. And so I didn't support it. The counter argument is, with you're 90 years old, that you no longer serves a societal purpose for you to be in prison. I understand that, but the bill as was written, I couldn't support it, and I think Californians expect that life without the possibility of parole actually means that.
Yeah.
So we have to be honest, and we shouldn't call it life without the possibility of parole if there is a possibility.
Right. So the other big public issue is homelessness, and in Orange County, people see homelessness, but not to the extent they had just a few years ago. I mean, there's some changes that have been made, but in Los Angeles, it feels like it's a ever-growing, impactful issue as it relates to living in stores and retailers and other things. Even though they have a county tax that goes to homeless support and a city sales tax that goes to homeless support, and the billions of dollars that have come in from the state to homeless, how can the public have confidence that those dollars are being spent properly?
That's an excellent question. We actually do have. I mean, homelessness is now impacting virtually every community. Yeah. Even the most affluent communities now are being impacted with homelessness. In the areas that I still represent, you once represented, Santa Ana, Garden Grove, Anaheim, there's a homeless population.
Yeah.
And to your point that we don't have accountability, at least sufficient accountability to make sure that the dollars that are devoted to dealing with homelessness are efficiently spent, that is correct. I authored a piece of legislation. It was actually initiated by the governor concerning care courts to deal with those who are schizophrenic, largely homeless, to hold.
But by the way, I do want to talk about that, because I
Right.
don't want to only point to the challenging part of homelessness, but I do believe focusing on that, the mental health aspect, is really a positive sign that came out of the legislative process.
And that's going into effect here in Orange County on October the 1st, really October the 2nd, and San Diego County as well. Other counties will follow a year from now, Los Angeles County on December 1.
Tell people how that would work.
So here's what that is. Care court is a concept that is focused upon those who have schizophrenia or schizophrenia-like conditions, mostly homeless, not necessarily, but mostly homeless.
Yeah.
And what it does is it puts them into a system that is overseen by a judge, and the judge can order, for example, housing, can order medication. We're not going to actually incarcerate people because you won't be administered medication beyond what the law provides right now involuntarily. But it provides the framework with someone who is responsible to make sure that framework exists, and the judge is responsible to make sure you're progressing, that you're actually moving forward to become a productive citizen. What folks don't understand, a lot of folks, is that even those with schizophrenia, when they're properly medicated, can become productive citizens.
Right. And the flip side is people who can go in without really severe or even any mental health issues, living on the street, struggling for food, trying to find a place to sleep, can push those addicts or those just people who are on the street to a point of mental challenge, and mental health issues can crop up in almost anyone after a period of time on the street, is what I've been told.
You are absolutely correct. If you're on the street, living under a bridge, worried about your personal physical security, you're obviously homeless, so you're worried about the elements, and you're worried about food, you're worried about all those things, that after a period of time, you're going to most people become mentally ill. You're sleep deprived, all those things. Right. And so it's this vicious cycle, and the purpose of care court is not just on those individuals with schizophrenia or schizophrenia-like conditions, also the families. The families are dramatically impacted, and we're hopeful. The governor is behind this 1,000%. So,
and some of the last elements of addressing that mental health component of homelessness, there are the initiatives on the ballot and other things that maybe share a little bit more than just the the population of schizophrenics, but others that have mental health issues that are in that homeless
So,
population.
yes, there's most likely going to be a bond measure that's on the ballot that provides sort of mental health bond measure that provides for housing. One of the key elements in getting someone well is a stabilized living situation. That it's almost impossible, as you pointed out, it's almost impossible to get well if you're not in a stable, housed, sheltered situation. So that's part of the bond measure. There's also this is a little wonky, but years ago, you may remember we passed a millionaire's tax that an extra 1% on those who make over $1 million for mental health services. Unfortunately, those funds have become so constrained that we've not been able to use them for intended purposes. So, for example, I had a bill to use some of that money in jails to provide for mental health treatment. Couldn't do it. So there's going to be another measure on the ballot that provides expanded uses for that money. For example, to provide mental health treatment in jails, that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, the first time that money was used in Orange County for residences is in Anaheim, the Diamond Apartments built by Jamboree Housing over off of Lincoln and the 5 freeway, just so you know. And Mental Health Services Act funds came through the county to help cover that housing for people with mental health issues, primarily people coming off the street. And anybody should go look at that apartment building and see it's a model in the community. It's safe. It's something the neighbors don't have to worry about because it has management and supervision of the residents, and they're taken care of in terms of services and wraparound support. So, there's a lot of ways to address that.
Well, and kudos to you as mayor for being part of that process and leading that process and championing that process. And I'm still, in other cities, they're still converting some motels that are a bit run down into transitional living facilities. Yeah. I'll toot my own horn for a second, that I carried a bill a few years ago that said you didn't need to go through the CEQA process if you were simply adding a kitchen facility to one of these motels so you could have some sort of a stabilized environment. CEQA is a bit of a third rail in Sacramento, and we fought hard to get it done.
But to find those places where you don't need that. I mean,
right.
So we can talk about all the negative things. I mean, as we wrap up, is there, where can you present the positive future of California? I know you mentioned to me a little while ago that you're not intending on moving out of state, nor am I. And unfortunately, we see some of our friends do that. But how do we show that positive future of the state when people are a little anxious, depressed, or sad about some of the conditions they see?
Well, first of all, I think you and I both grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in the Midwest, came out here to go to UCLA, and there's nothing like California in terms of the raw elements of the quality of life, whether it's the geography or the climate or whatever it may be. We need to obviously build upon those, and we need to address some of the issues that you talk about. But I do think I think we're making progress. I do think that we're making progress. I do think that this is a place where if you're an entrepreneur, you can come and you can still do well. My children are entrepreneurs, and they're doing okay. They're doing okay. I think that California is still a place where you can find quality education. We have a way to go, but we still have the educational opportunities in California are better than most of the country. Sadly, I mean, it becomes, and I've done this myself, it becomes sort of de rigueur to point out all our infirmities versus the things that are happening that are improving California. We're going to have the Olympics here. It's going to be a great, wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So that's,
well, you and I can end on this note, excuse me, that we both are fortunate to have grandchildren living close by. And I think your oldest granddaughter is Ellie, who is 12, and my oldest granddaughter is Ella, who's 12. So there's always good, common, positive focus for the future, I think, and looking at the.
And that's what you and I live for.
That's exactly right. And I really do appreciate you coming in and sharing with us today, Senator.
Thank you, Curt. It's a pleasure. Thanks.